I need to thank our incredible staff, our team, but most importantly, I need to thank my wife for letting me do this. Because had she said no, I would not have gone. We would have had a big argument, but I thank you, Cheryl, and my kids for letting me do this, and for you guys. You guys made the stuff, the donations. I'm going to talk a little bit about what you let us do and continue to do. It's amazing. So 16 of us, 16 South Florida rabbis left for Israel Sunday, late in the afternoon. And I think all of us agree that we landed in Israel on Monday, shattered, heartbroken, afraid, filled with rage. You could feel there was just no energy among us. While in Israel, I lived among violent reverberations of the horrific reality of what took place on October 7th and the weeks that have followed. Hang tight with me here because we're going to go on a little bit of a journey. But just yesterday, while we were sitting in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Yerushalayim, learning from some of the most highly trained doctors in Israel about how the hospital is healing the wounded from October 7th and the current war, all of a sudden, our phones started to buzz and light up, warning us that a brutal attack on Israel had just been, thankfully, foiled. But as a result, several Israeli soldiers were wounded, and one of them, our alerts were telling us critically. You know, Israel is a tiny place. The city of Yerushalayim is a tiny place, and within moments, right outside of the hospital and throughout the entire city of Jerusalem, the sirens of emergency vehicles began to wail. An all too familiar sound that lets the city know it's happened again. One of the doctors who was speaking with us, he looked at his phone, he stood up and he apologized as he was being called to treat the soldier who was clinging to life. And he left the room, and his empty chair at the head of this very formal conference room that we were sitting in was a reminder of all of the hundreds and hundreds of empty chairs in Israel. Chairs that should be filled by people now attempting to heal and tend to a broken nation. Chairs that should be filled by people who are on the front lines fighting the savages in Gaza who broke us, but broke us only temporarily. Chairs that should be filled by people who have been murdered by these savages or abducted by them. There are so many empty chairs in businesses that are shuttered as their owners and staff are fighting the war. Sleepless parents sit and stare at an empty chair or two or three, waiting for some sign that their children survived another night on the battlefield. Grieving widows and others who still have dirt under their fingernails, having just buried one of Israel's fallen heroes, weep as they walk past the empty chair in their home. Children who look at the empty chair at the table and ask, "Eifo Abba, where is Daddy?" And what is there to say to them? Chairs that are empty because the person who should sit in that chair is lying in a hospital bed, traumatized not just by physical injuries that will heal over time, but mental wounds that are so deep that they're never going to heal. And of course, there are the chairs that are empty in too many homes and businesses because savages, many disgracefully called freedom fighters, literally dragged those who should fill those chairs out of the land of Israel. As my colleagues and I sat in that hospital conference room and stared at the empty chair once filled by the doctor, the sirens went quiet as we were briefed on another seriously wounded soldier who heard that there were 16 American rabbis, and he requested that we visit him to say Gomel, the prayer one says after surviving a near-death experience. As we got up to visit the soldier, the sirens filled Jerusalem once again, this time calling out, "Make way for our injured heroes." One siren grew louder and louder as it approached us and the hospital team, led by the doctor whose empty chair sat before us. Sadly, that soldier did not survive, but he and his brothers and sisters saved all of us in Jerusalem yesterday as they neutralized another savage whose car was filled with an arsenal of weapons that would have been used to attack the people of Jerusalem and add another dark chapter to the horrific reality that began on October 7th. To call it reality is absurd because it was, it is, and sadly it's going to continue to be the nightmare of all nightmares. One that is devoid of morality and defies all rationality. So much so that Israel's most highly skilled intelligence experts, men and women who expect the worst from humanity, were caught off guard and shaken to their core. After we visited, after we said Gomel for the wounded soldier who sat in his bed, his beautiful young face, while so swollen from the shrapnel wounds, that face was still so capable of capturing the trauma he experienced. After we said the prayer with him, we headed off to Har Herzl, Israel's military cemetery, and we attended the daily service to honor the dead from October 7th and visit the graves of recently fallen soldiers. I had been pretty good until that visit emotionally, but nothing could prepare me for what we saw there. And no words can truly capture what I witnessed. Mounds and mounds of fresh soil, each with a placard, some already with gravestones, names, dates, October 7th, October 7th, October 7th, October 7th, over and over again, until we moved to the days after. And then there were the preparations being made for the thousands of people on their way to yesterday's funerals, and I'm certain today. Everybody goes to the funerals in Israel. Everybody shows up at the Shiva houses in Israel. Each grave, a mound of soil, covered with photographs featuring pictures of mainly, but not always, mainly young boys, my Jonah's age, notes from friends, flags, T-shirts once worn that capture life's milestones. Other objects, notes, and trinkets capturing a beautiful life cut down by Israel's obligatory war of self-defense. Defense not just of the Jewish state, but the Jewish world. We must know that the hate we are living here is part of the violent reverberations of October 7th. And because of this, each fresh grave, all the graves in that cemetery, represent a life lost protecting every single person in this sanctuary, every person on Zoom, every Jewish person you know on the face of this earth. Eddie's going to pull up a picture here. War, who don't have to go to war ourselves to protect the Jewish people. That thousands of Jews do have to go to war. That thousands have and thousands will go to war to protect their homeland. Those of us who don't have to do it owe it to this man's children to do that. I lit a Yisker candle at his grave. And as I stood up, I looked over to see a young woman with her hair covered in a black kerchief sitting in a chair by another fresh grave. And I walked over to her. Amid the flowers and the flags and the notes and the trinkets on what was clearly her husband's grave was a sonogram image of an unborn child. And I looked, and she was holding her pregnant stomach. Hamakom yenechem etchem, I said to her, may you be comforted among the mourners of Zion, by all of us. Toda Rabbah, she said, as she held her unborn baby a little closer. Another father, another widow, another child that we need to ensure knows that we honor their father for protecting us, for protecting our children who are not called to serve in the IDF. But each and every single one of us are called upon to comfort. And we are all called upon to remember. And most importantly, we are all called upon to honor by living our Judaism loudly and proudly. Because if we don't do that, these two fathers die in vain. But by living proudly as Jews, and I was told this by an Israeli top soldier, when we live our Judaism loudly and proudly, we become members of the IDF. Not fighting on the literal battlefield, but becoming defenders of the Jewish faith, the Jewish people, and the Jewish nation, ensuring that there is a tomorrow for Judaism. For Israelis, Israeli parents, Israeli children, young Israeli adults, military service is a given. Here at Ramat Shalom Beth Israel, right before I left, Marissa Steinberg, our education director, brought in an 18-year-old Israeli girl who is on a gap year. She's working with Broward Federation. She's graduated from high school and taking a year of service to work within the larger Jewish community before she begins her military service in Israel. She sat in that classroom right back there with our middle school kids, and they innocently said to her, "Do you really want to serve in the military? Isn't it scary? Isn't it dangerous?" And I watched this young Israeli woman's face. She's only been here for a while, and with everything going on and all the holidays, this was one of her first time with middle schoolers. And I could see that she looked confused. "Of course I want to serve in the military," she said. "I want to serve my country. I'm proud to do it. And I'm proud to stand up for who we are." Who we are. Our kids have a way to go because they didn't fully get it. You see, here in America, if we're afraid, which many of us are, we can take our mezuzahs down, our stars of David off our neck. We can hide our identity. I don't want you to do it, but you can. We can give in to the fear. In Israel, fear is not an option. Hiding is not an option. You give into the fear in Israel, the perpetrators of October 7th will become victorious. Israeli society will stop. And the perpetrator's mission will be accomplished from the river to the sea. And Israelis living in the tiny Jewish nation, where can they hide? How can they hide? They can't, and they don't want to hide. Hiding is not part of who they are, and it shouldn't be, and it can't be. And fear, well, fear is just not an option. So they cross that narrow bridge together with heads held high and hope in their heart, and they serve that incredible country. From those of you who joined me while I was in Israel on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday evenings on Zoom, as I sat in my hotel room at 1 a.m. in my pajamas, your presence was a great comfort to me. And I shared with you my daily experiences. The visits with the parents of the parent who has 2 children held hostage. Survivors of the massacre on Kfar Aza. The visit to the IDF base with our incredible soldiers. Standing before the burnt, mangled cars from the Nova Music Festival. Sitting in a rehab with a survivor of the festival and an IDF soldier who lost his leg when Hezbollah fired a missile at his tank, and so much more. For 4 days, I lived among the reverberations, and it was painful, and it added to the shattering I felt before I left. We recorded the Zooms, and we'll be sharing the links to the videos if you want to go back and watch them. Tonight, I've done enough talking about the reverberations of October 7th. These reverberations are awful, they're not over, and they were a big part of my 4 days in Israel, and there will be more, many more. But this is not the lesson I want to send tonight. And I do not want to live in fear of future reverberations. Because during my 4 days in Israel, there was also shockingly, for all of us, laughter. Real, genuine laughter. We got to spend some time with the children of Sderot. Sderot is right on the Gaza border. It's been one of the city's hardest hit. You can't stay in Sderot safely. So these children, along with their parents, had to flee their city and relocate to that little town in the Negev I mentioned, Yerucham. And there is a temporary school that's been set up for these kids. And we got to visit them. We got to spoil them and share gifts with them that you sent with me. And we got to welcome, because we were there on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, we got to welcome the Jewish month of Kislev together. And their teacher, like any good Jewish teacher, stood up there and said, "What's important about Kislev?" And they all shouted out, "Chanukah!" And my colleagues and I were tasked and given very strict directions to hand each of them just one rabbi's sufganiot, one real Israeli jelly donut. I broke the rules. And some of the teachers wanted to know why some of the kids had 3, 4, 5 sufganiot. These kids smiled, huge smiles, jelly all over their faces. We sang together, and it was beautiful, and it was joyful. And as I felt that joy at first, I felt guilty. It felt wrong to be happy. But these children who witnessed things we can't imagine, who are survivors of a Jewish pogrom in 2023, who had to flee their homes. There's a lot of talk about people in Gaza having to flee their homes. There are thousands of Israelis who have had to flee their homes. These children had to flee their homes, and they were joyful. And their joy was contagious. And they were teaching us rabbis, shattered American rabbis, that it's okay to smile. It is okay to smile. My colleagues and I were on a mission, encouraged by many of our congregants like you, a mission to hand shekels, spending cash, to any member of the IDF we came across. Technically, I'm saying this to the cameras that'll go online, IDF soldiers are not supposed to take money, and they're good Jewish boys and girls, and most of them follow the rules. But they can take tzedakah. And we're rabbis and we know the loopholes. But we and many others were determined to shower them with kesef, with money, as a way of just giving them thanks and a little spending cash in their pockets. And they would laugh at our insistence to take some shekels, and we would laugh with them. And they would say, lo, 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 with big smiles on their faces. No, no, no. And we would say, Ken. Yes, with smiles back. And they would go for a bit. One of my colleagues was so bold as to stick the money right down their pants. And the laughter would increase, and eventually we'd win. And these young kids would leave us laughing about those crazy American rabbis. But they knew that they were loved. And it felt good. We needed to feel good. And goodness knows our IDF kids need to feel good. We visited the Rabbanut, the rabbinical authority of the IDF, the rabbis that oversee the IDF. And we learned that among many IDF soldiers, there is a renewed sense of spirituality during the war. Officials detail that it's common for this spirituality to happen during the war. It makes sense. But they've never, in all of his modern-day Israel's history, they've never seen such an interest. Normally, during a war, there are requests for lots and lots of tzitzit, taluses. It makes sense. But this time, the requests for taluses are 10 times more than normal. There's also been an incredible desire among soldiers to have Torah scrolls on bases and in the battlefields. So much so that the IDF has basically run out of Torahs. And I'm happy to share with you that as I stood with the IDF rabbi who's in charge of the Torahs, there's a guy. He took us to what the room that he calls the biggest ark in Israel. I texted Terry Balter and Robert Pinkert and Donna Berger, and I said, I know we've been talking about selling some of our Torah scrolls because we are blessed. I said, might we consider donating one of the scrolls to the IDF? And without hesitation, they said, absolutely. So we are in the process of sending a scroll to the battlefield. We visited Shalva, an incredible organization in Jerusalem that works with kids and their families with special needs. Many of the families they work with have had to leave their homes because of the rocket attacks, and it's hard enough for a family without special needs to find a new home. Add special needs to the equation. So Shalva is housing them. They had lunch for us. A lot of the kids helped prepare the lunch. They were so happy to see us. They were so happy to have worked hard to prepare, I think, the best meal we had in Israel. And the entire facility was just filled with smiles and happiness and joy. There was a birthday party down the hall with desserts that weren't for us, but they looked really good. And they were singing. As war raged and families were attempting to rebuild, life was good in Shalva. I told you about our visit to Shaarei Tzedek Hospital when the doctor had to rush out. Before he did, he shared something amazing. The hospital just broke a record that they were celebrating while we were there. The most babies born in the month of October ever. And these babies are being celebrated, welcomed into the world. Brisses all over the place. Namings. Happy parents and grandparents, a growing Jewish people. Our last visit in Israel was to the Jewish agency that works with Olim, people who make Aliyah to Israel from all over the world. While for reasons linked to the reverberations of October 7th, The number of people seeking to make Aliyah is skyrocketing off the charts. And Israel is growing by leaps and bounds. You're going to see my new best friend pop up on the screen in a moment. She's one of the newest members of the Jewish state. And her name, I'm going to wait for her picture to appear because you're going to just be taken by her in a minute. I tried to put her in my suitcase, but it wouldn't work. You okay there, Ed? Eddie, by the way, Eddie is working very hard, and this is not oh, there she is. I'll tell you. This is my new best friend, and her name is Mazal. Then we brought toys. I was given a very complicated kitchen set that I had to figure out how to put together without directions, and she wanted it set up immediately. And as I was setting it up, she kept taking my kippah off my head. She wanted it up here and not back there. So I have to do that for her. I told her I would. She smiled at her new toy. And look at her sweatshirt, by the way. You see what it says on it? It says smile. She smiled a lot. We sang Hatikva together. We played games. This little girl, this Mazal, Luck, in her 4 years, had all the wisdom and insight that I had been seeking. She was full of life and joy and vitality. She was flourishing, and she asked me, Ata ole, are you a new immigrant too? And when I told her no, she frowned. And when I said, Anima Artsot Habrit, I'm from America, she smiled very big, and she gave me this next picture. You're going to see a card she made herself. I hadn't felt since October 6th. Happiness. And I was smiling. I can't say I was no longer heartbroken or afraid or angry. But Mazal, with some help from the kids at Shalva, the IDF soldiers who we showered with shekels, the Torah scroll that we're going to send, the babies of Shaarei Tzedek and the children of Sderot and others. They allowed me to feel something more than the reverberations of October 7th. They allowed me to feel the joy of the Jewish people, an inexplicable joy, a joy in the midst of heartache and war and fear. Little Mazal, with her zest for life, showed me that Jewish life is moving forward full steam ahead. And I can't stop playing and laughing. I can't just focus on the war, the dead, the hostages, the hate, the threats. Trust me, I could. I could continue to doom scroll, the phrase used for those of us who just sit and scroll through social media and the news. I can't ignore it. I'm not going to ignore it. But Mazal taught me that I have to start living again. That I can't just stand up here and say, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live. It's not a slogan. It's a reality. One that can only be appreciated by doing it. And through tears, laughing while we do it. Late yesterday afternoon, a colleague shared the story of Reb Zusha, a man who lived a life filled with terrible hardships. He was like a modern-day Job. You think of a problem, a tragedy, a loss, he lived it. But Reb Zusha was always happy. And he expressed this happiness by dancing. He was always dancing. And those around him couldn't understand how in the world he could dance, how he could be happy. Reb Zusha was one day one of his students said to him, your life is filled with so much pain, so much pain. Why in the world do you dance all the time? And he explained, when you dance, you always have one foot on the ground and one foot connected and up in the air. One foot connected to reality, the pain, the fear, the heartache, the loss, the rage, the shattering. You need that foot on the ground. Otherwise, you'd be out of touch. You'd lose your balance. You'd come crashing down. But when you dance, you always have your other foot up in the air, closer to God, closer to beauty, joy, spirituality, the inexplicable wonders of the world. All of these things, the leg in the air and the leg on the ground, they're part of life, and you can't live in any type of meaningful way without your foot in the air. And so, while I stink at dancing, I'm returning from Israel committed to dancing and embracing the beauty of life, the joys of Judaism, the companionship of community, and so many other aspects of life that make me want to dance, that make me genuinely smile. I'm not going to take my other foot off the ground. I'm going to insist that we continue to help our Israeli brothers and sisters, help my little friend Mazal, support our soldiers, remember the dead, pray for the healing and the wounded, teach the truth here in America, and fight to bring our hostages home. And by the way, I'm hoping that by Sunday, I will be sharing a very short 3-day to 4-day solidarity trip to Israel in December for RSBI members who want to join me as we go once again to volunteer. This is not a trip for first-timers. This is a trip for people who want to roll up their sleeves, spend a day on a farm, spend a day on a military base, spend a day at a hospital, spend a day at a nursing home. I'll keep you posted. We are also bringing in EVP, emergency volunteers for Israel, who are in desperate need of police officers, firemen, EMTs, doctors, and nurses to work on the front lines. And there's also volunteers for Israel. They are accepting applications and talking with them. They are not yet putting people out there, and their needs are focused also specifically, because I know some of you have also spoken with them on Hebrew, very good Hebrew speakers. There's going to be lots of opportunities, and if you're not comfortable going, that's okay, but I know some of you really want to go, and there will be other opportunities. This isn't going away. But while I keep that one foot on the ground, I must, and you must, find joy and embrace it. We have a great bar mitzvah tomorrow. We're going to celebrate, and we're going to laugh, and we're going to dance, and we're going to lift one leg higher and higher, because life is going on in Israel, and Israelis, they're dancing. They're laughing through the tears, and we must do the same. It's the only way for Am Yisrael Chai to be our reality.
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Hey!
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Join us.
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu,
Oda, this is not just for the bar mitzvah family. Anybody wants to join us, join us.
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Hey!
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Hey!
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Hey!
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Hey!
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Hey! Od Avinu Chai! Hey! Od Avinu Chai! Hey! Od Avinu, Od Avinu,
Od Avinu Chai. Od Avinu Chai.
Hey!
Od Avinu Chai. Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Od Avinu Chai. Hey, Od Avinu Chai. Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai. Hey, Od Avinu Chai. Od Avinu Chai.
Hey! Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai. So that's what I learned in Israel. So if you want to join me and you want to experience it, let me know.